Viewing or listening to this podcast confirms acceptance of the disclaimer visible on your screen or found at authorscott.com/podcast. Welcome to the Regaining Health and Humanity podcast. I'm Dr. Scott Johnson, your guide on this journey to natural well-being. Here we explore evidence-based insights, revolutionary breakthroughs, and powerful health strategies that not only inform, but inspire change. Together, we'll uncover the mysteries of human existence and unlock the secrets to thriving. This podcast is more than just knowledge. It's your catalyst for unleashing extraordinary potential. Get ready. Your journey to boundless health and happiness starts now. Welcome to the Regaining Health and Humanity podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Johnson, aiming to arm you with natural health information to help you feel better naturally. There are certain compounds found in plants that are highly beneficial to human health. Polyphenols, carotenoids, and flavonoids are just a few. Today, we're going to discuss and focus on polysaccharides, which are long-chain carbohydrates found in natural sources like aloe vera, rice bran, mushrooms, and other plants. To discuss this topic, I've invited Dr. John E. Lewis to the show, the founder and president of Dr. Lewis Nutrition. Dr. Lewis has a passion for educating others about the importance of nutrition, dietary supplementation, and exercise for health. And in particular, he studies and applies clinical nutrition for the benefit of mankind. He has conducted over 30 different studies in his research career, evaluating the effects of nutrition, dietary supplementation, and exercise on human health. And he has over 180 peer-reviewed publications in some of the world's leading scientific journals. A seminal publication from his Alzheimer's study in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease not only spurred Dr. Lewis to leave academic and pursue a science-based business career, but it also enabled him to be selected for a widely acclaimed TEDx Miami talk about how dietary supplementation can improve brain health. Dr. Lewis embodies the model of health he promotes to others by eating a whole food, plant-based diet for over 27 years, taking certain key dietary supplements, and utilizing a rigorous daily exercise training program. Welcome, Dr. Lewis.
Dr. Johnson, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. I look forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, I do as well, because I'm interested in diving deeper into polysaccharides, and especially from the sources that you've been researching with aloe vera and rice bran. I'm familiar with them from mushrooms because I wrote a book about that, but interested in ones from other sources. Why is nutrition our number one behavior for achieving and maintaining overall health?
That's a great question. I think very simply, it boils down to the amount of published literature in the entire spectrum or scope of scientific literature. So whether you want to compare it to, for example, exercise, which obviously is a very important pillar of my own personal strategy for maintaining health. I mean, it dwarfs exercise. And then I think of exercise as kind of like number two. Mm-hmm. And then after that, you have all these other things like stress management, proper sleep. I mean, anything like in the alternative world, like acupuncture or any kind of red light therapy, sound therapy, music therapy. I'm not saying that there is anything wrong with any of these things. Of course, these are strategies that people use. But again, when you just look at the magnitude of the amount of information about nutrition in general, and of course, I'm lumping dietary supplements, and any kind of nutritional factor all under this one umbrella, which maybe is not the fairest way to make these comparisons. But if you just look at it from the context of the magnitude of the amount of published information, combined with how significant it is every time we bend our elbow, open our mouth, and stick something in it, in terms of how our genes respond to that, and then how the genes guide our cells to function, it is truly profound. When you look at nutrition, I mean, again, don't take my word for it. Just do your own comparison of all the information on nutrition on PubMed compared to, again, some of these other things I've mentioned. And it's really enormous. I mean, it's just, in fact, it's overwhelming. And I don't know about you, but anybody who tries to come off as being the expert of everything nutrition, it kind of makes me a little bit suspicious, because I just think nutritional science is so enormous, it's impossible to know everything about everything. It's just, you could be the smartest guy in the world and you could not possibly know everything about nutritional science.
And really, nutritional science is changing. It's an ever evolving field and we're learning more and more. But I agree that nutrition really is that foundation from which we build the rest of our health on. And if we can have that nutrition established, then everything else we do, like the dietary supplements you've mentioned, or any type of meditation or exercise, that is going to work far more effectively if nutrition is already there, because your body is relying on that daily infusion of nutrients in order for cells to function properly, for body systems to work efficiently. So I agree that nutrition has to be there first, which is why I think I'm excited to talk about polysaccharides and learn more about them and how they fit into that nutrition. Maybe you can help us by understanding what exactly are polysaccharides, where do they come from, and then what are some of the benefits to health that you're seeing?
Well, you mentioned it in the introduction, these long chain long chain carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm.
So we as Americans have been so conditioned. It's been the last maybe 50 years. Anytime the average American hears the word sugar, he or she immediately thinks bad, right? Like, you don't have there's like no room in that little doorway to think, oh, wait a minute, maybe they're not all bad. Like, there's just no possibility. But what I like to explain to people is that in just very simple terms, you don't have to be a biochemist to really appreciate just the simplicity of the distinction. So you have monosaccharides, the simplest form of sugar, like high fructose corn syrup. I think most people agree you shouldn't be eating high fructose corn syrup every day. If you are, you're probably setting yourself up for some bad things down the road. Then you have disaccharides, two sugar molecules like sucrose. Again, probably not the best thing to be consuming in copious amounts of every day. And then you have the polysaccharides. You literally have these hundreds of glucose units attached together by these very sophisticated molecular structured bonds. And the ones that my colleagues and I have spent, at least in my own career, the last almost 20 years, collectively, when you put Dr. McDaniel and a few other of my colleagues together and you add all of our years together, you're talking almost a couple of 100 years of combined research experience and clinical practice experience from aloe vera and rice bran. And now you're talking about incredibly dynamic, potentially beneficial nutrients or compounds that literally every cell can benefit from. So I say all of that to say that I almost beg people, please do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Sugar is a very misused word. And just because somebody says all sugars are bad for you, I think that person, number one, is factually incorrect. And number two, ignorant. Because again, all sugars are not created equally. It depends on their biochemical structure, and it also depends on where they're coming from. So high fructose corn syrup that's been chemically modified from corn versus the polysaccharides from aloe vera and rice bran, completely different things, but yet they're all still carbohydrates. So folks, please just be aware and mindful. I know me as a researcher, as a scientist, as a writer, very particular about the language and the way I use words. It just really bothers me when I hear people, these so-called talking head experts out there talking about all sugars are bad. That's absolutely an untrue, completely ignorant statement. So aloe vera, we've known, for example, whether you believe in, Christianity, the Bible, you can look in the Bible, you can see humans have been using aloe vera for thousands of years. It's a plant that some human along the way said, wow, that's a very interesting looking plant. I wonder if it has any health promoting or nutritional benefit. And these polysaccharides, the ace-mannan, the acetylated polymannose, it's got several different synonyms to it. This, again, I would put up against just about anything else that Mother Nature provides for us. Obviously, curcumin is an incredibly amazing nutrient that comes from the turmeric root. But if you look at all of the different effects that have been published, not just from our laboratory, the University of Miami, I'm talking globally, worldwide, we've had scientists all over the world looking at ace-mannan and how it has such incredible benefits to human health. Same thing with rice bran. This amazing material from the rice plant. And of course, we know most countries in Asia, rice is a staple food. However, they're eating white rice for the most part. They're not eating the whole grain rice. So when you strip the husk off, that's the first layer. Then the next layer is that bran that gives it the brown color. Unfortunately, a lot of that is getting stripped off as well. So then you're left with that big white endosperm, that digestible fiber, which again is nutritional. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. But where the real dynamic aspect of that plant comes from is the rice bran that, again, is typically either thrown away or fed to livestock. So I don't know about you. I don't know anybody who eats aloe vera. And even if you did, the gel is 99 or so percent water. So you'd have to drink bucket loads of that gel. And oh, by the way, it's not exactly the best tasting thing.
Yep.
But you'd have to drink bucket loads of that stuff to get any real therapeutic or physiological benefit from the polysaccharide content in that gel without having it, first of all, dehydrated and then separating the polysaccharides out from some of the other materials. But you put those two things together in a dietary supplement and you concentrate them into an amount where you can have that therapeutic or physiological benefit. And that's what we've showed time and time again in our research at the University of Miami that has, I don't know about you, but I can remember vaguely as a student having maybe a lecture or two in biochemistry talking about saccharides in general. And all I really knew at that time, up until meeting Dr. McDaniel, who was really my mentor and somebody I'm very grateful to in this life for what he's introduced to me. But I basically just thought saccharides were just a fuel source for the mitochondria. I didn't really have any appreciation for all these other potential benefits. I'm just continuing to watch sort of the evolution in my own life of introducing this topic of polysaccharides to people and then sharing with them the research that we've conducted and published, and then kind of letting it go from there in terms of them trying the polysaccharides for themselves and then, waiting to see what kind of response they get. But I've been just incredibly a blessed person, and I'm grateful for having met Dr. McDaniel. Actually, it's two people. It's Dr. Reg McDaniel on the aloe vera side, and then Miss Barbara Kimley on the rice bran side. These two people both came into my life about 20 years ago and not only changed my career, they changed my life because they shared with me their stories of healing and the power of these polysaccharides. And it ended up allowing me to have these two simultaneous lines of research going at the same time at the University of Miami. And now here I am today talking to you about all of this.
Going back to your statement that not all sugars are bad, the brain uses sugar to function properly. And that's kind of the next topic I want to get into. There's good emerging research now showing that dementia, Alzheimer's disease are actually poor glucose management or sugar metabolism in the brain. And so how do polysaccharides impact brain health, particularly in relation to memory, focus, and even maybe neuroprotection?
Well, so the best way to answer that question is to simply tell you that even though I'm not a full-time researcher anymore, but to date in my research career has been the most rewarding and significant finding. And that is we put a sample of people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease on this particular polysaccharide-based formula. If I'm willing to bet you and many of your listeners have had somebody in your circle who's been affected with this terrible disease that from a conventional medical perspective, there really is nothing for those folks, unfortunately. When you look at the 5 FDA-approved drugs for dementia, if you're lucky, they'll delay decline or delay the progression of the disease for a while. But then after that, the person continues falling off the cliff in terms of how this disease takes over. So we put them on this formula for 12 months. We assess their cognitive function. And I want people to also understand a lot of times when people hear the term cognitive function, they immediately just associate memory with that. Memory is only one aspect of cognitive function. You have executive functioning, the ability to balance your checkbook. You have processing speed, how quickly you can determine things. You have recall ability. Where did you leave your keys last night? You have both short-term and long-term memory. You have spatial and temporal awareness. Do you know what day it is? Do you know where you are? I mean, there are lots of different things that go into cognitive function. So it's much, much more than just any aspect of memory. We used the ADAS-Cog in our study. We used what is considered to be the gold standard for assessing cognitive function, particularly with people with any form of dementia. We conducted this test at baseline, 3, 6, 9, and 12 months, and then we drew blood at baseline and 12 months due to a limitation in our budget for the study. But Dr. Johnson, what we found was clinically and statistically significant improvement in cognitive function according to the ADAS-Cog at 9 and 12 months. So I want people to appreciate the fact that, number one, you could have hundreds or thousands of subjects or assessments in a study, and the law of large numbers will say, well, just due to the nature of your size of your study, you can find statistical significance. It might be completely due to randomness or error, but you could still find things that are statistically significant. But when you have clinical significance, and again, according to the ADAS-Cog, any change, good or bad, of 4 points, whether it's improving or decreasing cognitive function, means that it is clinically or practically relevant. And that's exactly what we showed in our study at 9 and 12 months. So there's literally nothing else in the literature. In fact, I basically issue a challenge to people every time I have this conversation with someone. You find somebody out there, find a similar study to ours. And to me, it doesn't matter if you look at any type of diet, certainly forget the drugs, they don't do anything. But any type of diet, any other dietary supplement, exercise, hyperbaric oxygen, acupuncture, red light therapy, whatever the treatment is, nothing else has showed what we showed in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease. So again, we're talking about the ability of using these polysaccharides in a dietary supplement to be able to help people improve their cognitive function. I mean, the published data are impressive, but when you actually have caregivers and very skeptical staff members calling me up and saying, hey, Dr. Lewis, my loved one or this patient, or they're talking about things they haven't done for years in some cases, you actually see that type of change in people. That's powerful. And that's beyond just being a good scientist, right? I mean, it's one thing to do morally, ethically responsible research and science and do your job appropriately, but when you can actually impact people's lives on that level, that's taking your work and your research to a whole different level. So what underpins that, right? So that's the kind of the next aspect of this. How do you explain that clinical improvement? So we showed improvement in the CD4 to CD8 ratio, which is a general marker of your of your overall immune system's functioning. So that's your ratio of your helper cells to your cytotoxic cells. And that's not just important for people with Alzheimer's, that's important obviously for all of us. We showed reductions in TNF alpha and VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. So these two proteins have commonly been looked at in heart disease and cancer. Our paper was probably the first one that ever showed that in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's disease. So we actually lowered those two inflammatory markers. We need those at a physiological level, but when they become pathological, that's where the problems arise. And then we also showed just under a 300% increase in the adult stem cells according to seeding cells. So I didn't mention that these people were on average 79.9 years of age. And they didn't just have moderate to severe Alzheimer's, they had diabetes, depression, different forms of heart disease. I mean, these were an older group of people that were very sick, obviously. You look at all of those things combined and how that supports the clinical change. You have the overall improvement in immune function, lowering inflammation, which we know is related to everything today, any type of chronic disease. And then that improvement in the adult stem cell production process of just under 300%. And we published that first paper in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease. And you mentioned my number of publications in the introduction. Dr. Johnson, this was the only one time in my career that I actually had the editor of a journal call me. He called me up and he goes, oh my goodness, this paper is unreal. As soon as we get the reviews back from the reviewers, I'm going to recommend we publish this immediately because your data are so exciting and what you guys have shown is just truly remarkable. That's the only time in my career that ever happened. Now, we published 2 subsequent papers looking at brain-derived neurotropic factor. As we were wrapping up the study and writing that first article, we found some other papers that were talking about BDNF being this key protein related to memory creation, memory storage, hippocampus functioning, general neuroplasticity. A lot of things were being found by other people at that time. And we said, well, we didn't look at BDNF in our first paper. Let's go back and look at it and see what else we can find there. And so we ended up publishing 2 more articles from that study related to BDNF and different measures of cognitive function in one paper, and then BDNF and different measures of immune function and inflammation in another paper. The most interesting thing that we found, even though it was not statistically significant, we showed somewhere between an 11 and a 12% increase in BDNF over that 12-month period. It's a shame we didn't have the money to do the blood draws at 3, 6, and 9 months. We just, this was not a multi-million-dollar budget. This was about a $140,000 budget. And oh, by the way, I should mention this was only due to the generosity of a family. And I'm still on that path in terms of helping people with neurodegeneration as much as I can, and sharing this information with the world as much as possible. We also had a fourth paper, actually, even though, again, I'm no longer publishing peer-reviewed science for running a business. It's probably not even in my top 10 of daily priorities that I have to take care of these days. But we still have such a rich data set that I wanted to look into this idea of the Th1 to Th2 ratio in immune system functioning. I had read some other papers, and I came across this article about vitamin D, and they were talking about the Th1 to Th2 ratio. And I thought, well, that's very fascinating. We have all of these cytokines and growth factors. Let's look at it in our data set. The first thing I do when I write a paper is I go to PubMed and I see what else has been published, generally speaking, in that area. I could not find one other paper that had ever published anything related to Th1 and Th2 in Alzheimer's disease. And that for me was like, wow, that's kind of a fascinating thought that no one has even thought to look at this. So for our listeners, generally speaking, we're talking Th1 pro-inflammatory side, Th2 anti-inflammatory side. It's a bit of an oversimplification for how the immune system works. It's certainly much more sophisticated than that, but at least it gives you a data type that can kind of help you put into place what someone's clinical profile looks like. And so we had all of that data from the Alzheimer's study. We had another study that we had run in healthy people, collected the same cytokines and growth factors. So it was a very nice opportunity to compare the exact same 6 ratios in the Alzheimer's folks and in the healthy people. And what we showed was just mind-boggling. I mean, the people with Alzheimer's had these incredibly high Th1 dominant values, whereas the people with no known disease, healthy otherwise, all of their values were like somewhere around 1. So those were wildly statistically significant at baseline. And then over the 12-month period of the Alzheimer's study, 5 of the 6 ratios, they didn't certainly go close to 1.0 or even anywhere near it, but they at least, I call it less Th1 dominant. 5 of the 6 of them did. And then the clinical cherry on top of the cake, if you will, is that as the immune system got more rebalanced, this more of a equal balance between the Th1 and the Th2 components, cognitive functioning improved. But we've spent all of this time looking at how all these different mechanisms sort of intermingle and correlate with each other. And what we've showed, I would say, kind of a high level view overall, is that there is a very significant interaction between how the immune system functions and, generally speaking, brain health. Obviously, we're not looking at imaging data, so we don't know what's going on that level. But in terms of using a measure or measures of cognitive function as like a proxy measure of your brain's health, that's, obviously a limitation of science, but it's one of the ways that we can kind of generally say, okay, here's how the immune system works with the central nervous system, and more specifically, the brain's functioning. So it's just a really exciting branch of research that my colleagues and I have been at for a long time now. The only thing that stopped us from doing that was funding. I mean, prior to leaving academics full time, I tried 2 times with NIH, 2 times with the Alzheimer's Association to get more funding to do this research because of, again, we had this amazing opportunity from this family's generosity, but I could not get any of those people in any of those 4 attempts. I got literally nothing. And that was one of the things that ultimately helped to drive me out of academics full time. Is I just said, you know what, these people may talk publicly about their interest in nutrition, but here we actually have something that helps people. The 6th leading killer of Americans that has no conventional treatment. There's no consensus on what even causes Alzheimer's disease. So the idea that these people could, I don't know, in their arrogance or in their closed-mindedness of only wanting to look at pharmaceutical alternatives basically pushed me out of academics. So even though I was on cloud nine, I could not have been more enthusiastic and motivated to think of all the possibilities, right? I mean, it really was an eye opener of, how funding works and what these so-called experts, bureaucrats look for in terms of funding, because they definitely were not looking for something in the nutritional or dietary supplement realm.
Yeah, that's not surprising. It's unfortunate, but not surprising, because that's really remarkable and compelling research that you shared, Dr. Lewis, and something that should be further explored. And you're right, the funding is the biggest thing when you want to look at some kind of nutritional protocol or dietary supplement. You just don't tend to have the same type of backing that you would if you had a pharmaceutical solution instead.
That's right.
Your research heavily focused on the polysaccharides from rice bran and aloe vera. What drew you to that, or what made you focus on those sources?
Well, I would say, as I mentioned, meeting Dr. McDaniel and Barbara Kimley, if someone comes into my life, if their story sounds valid and legitimate and even potentially exciting, I have the ability, I guess you will, of attempting to incorporate that person and whatever he or she brings to the table into my own existence. And so with Dr. McDaniel, I mean, this man was just so incredibly brilliant, and he still is. I mean, he's in his late 80s, still goes to his office every day, still fighting the good fight. But you could just feel this man's presence in terms of his intelligence and his knowledge, and everything that he shared with me was just so compelling. And then with Barbara, and they didn't know each other, by the way. I should make sure that people are clear. Like, Barbara was living here in the South Florida area, in the Fort Lauderdale area. Dr. McDaniel is in the Dallas, Texas area. So they did not know each other, but yet they both came into my life around the same time. But in Barbara's case, I mean, to tell you very quickly about her story, she had metastatic thyroid disease, then went through surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, the whole 9 yards of conventional treatment, was still only given a 6-month prognosis, started taking this rice bran polysaccharide, and ended up living another 9 years. And so you could imagine, and at the point that I met her, she was already about 4 years past her 6-month prognosis. So this lady, I mean, talk about just a ball of energy and a ball of enthusiasm about how this rice bran product had saved her life. I'm not even scratching the surface on Dr. McDaniel's story. I mean, it's not just neurodegeneration. Actually, he and his colleagues started out in virus. He got introduced to this with a polysaccharide product back in 1985, 86, almost 40 years ago. And he had 8 or 10 guys with HIV come to his office one day. He was running a pathology unit at a hospital in Dallas. He didn't have any interest in nutrition. And they came to him and said, Dr. McDaniel, we're taking this aloe vera product. We have no viral load, and our CD4 cells are normal. How do you explain this? And he was like, get out of my office. So he's very Texan, and he thought he was being pranked, and he thought it was a big hoax. But fortunately for all of us, these guys would not take no for an answer. And so Dr. Reg couldn't get any of his physician friends interested, but he got his veterinarian friends interested at Texas A&M. And they were trying to actually turn it into a drug, but they couldn't kill anything. So that's where their drug discovery program ended. I'm sorry if that's a very long-winded answer, but it's just to give everyone context about how impressive everything that these two people told me was for them. And then how I thought, wow, I could really, take what they've already done. It's kind of like in a relay race, you pass the baton to the next person. And that's kind of metaphorically what I try to do is, pass the baton to other people as well and let them run with it. But I just felt such an overpowering desire to get more knowledge and get more into what they were already doing and what they'd already discovered for themselves. And it just worked out very elegantly for me in the ability to get funding to do some research with these two particular polysaccharides. I cannot take any credit for, saying, oh, wow, I want to get into aloe vera. Like, that never even crossed my mind until I met Dr. McDaniel. Or with Barbara, like, oh, wow, I want to get into rice bran research. That never even crossed my mind. I mean, it just, again, meeting these two people, everything they shared with me was so compelling. And it just was me having this sort of open mindset to say, okay, you've opened a door for me. I'm walking through it. Let me see what is on the other side. And then I took the ball and I ran with it. And now here I am today on this mission of spreading the word of the benefit of polysaccharides.
When you have mentors and people who have similar interests that can guide you and direct you into the path that you're interested in, and you're obviously passionate about polysaccharides and some of the health benefits they're having, you can really do a lot if you just put that passion to good use with the help of these guides and mentors that you're working with. Another thing that I wanted to explore is, in your research, have you found any connection between polysaccharides and gut health, especially any impact on the gut microbiome?
You know what? You're not the first person who has asked me that. And unfortunately, we didn't collect any GI function data in any of our research, but I have read, I can email you. There's one really good review paper that I stumbled upon about a year ago talking about how the polysaccharides function as like prebiotics. And obviously, feeds right into the whole gut brain connection and the gut being the second brain. So even though we did not collect any of that data in our clinical trials, they absolutely work very significantly on that gut brain axis. There's just no other very good explanation for why that happens, again, because of some of these other findings that people are looking at in terms of identifying these polysaccharides as being like prebiotic molecules or compounds, if you will. So yes, I totally believe that is. In fact, and I'm going to say when, not if, because I still do my own, nerdy part of myself. I still have goals for doing more research. I just have to build up my company successfully enough, financially enough to be able to do it. I'm not running around anymore with my hand out to NIH or those places, but at some point when we have the funding to be able to fund our own research, then the gut part of this story is definitely a part where we will focus on in terms of trying to look at some of these additional mechanistic factors that are going on.
Well, I'll definitely look forward to seeing that research in the future, because the gut is so central to human health in general. And part of that goes back to our initial conversation on nutrition feeding the gut and helping it be healthy and being able to digest and metabolize the foods we're eating and release the molecules and the beneficial polyphenols and the polysaccharides and everything else that's found within our foods that when we eat healthily is so important. And then the impact that has on the gut microbiome, which we're finding out more and more just how highly the gut microbiome influences human health, from mental and emotional health to the way our immune system functions to our inflammatory processes to our susceptibility to various diseases. So I will very much look forward to seeing that work in the future as you have funding and the time to do it.
Isn't it like 80 to 90% of serotonin and dopamine is actually formed in the gut, not in the brain?
Yeah, that's correct. 90% of your serotonin is, and there's other neurotransmitters that are also, like you're saying, dopamine and GABA, they're produced within the gut. And so that's why it's called a second brain. A lot of these neurotransmitters are produced there, and that's making your gut really key to so many different functions that are happening in the body. Dr. Lewis, you've provided a lot of information, and there may be some people that maybe are just feeling overwhelmed because they're brand new to polysaccharides and they don't know even where to begin with all the information that's been shared. So for somebody new to polysaccharides, what would you advise them as their first step that they should take to start using these polysaccharides for the brain health that you've mentioned and for immune health and any other benefits they want to achieve?
Well, without sounding too narcissistic, I would say I'm more than happy to share, and I always do. I don't violate the copyright of the journal by putting the full articles of our papers on our website. But if anybody wants to email me, I'm happy to share those PDFs. And we have a whole host of information about the polysaccharides on our website. So anybody can go to pubmed.gov. That's the clearinghouse for the National Institute of the Library of Medicine, where any journal that's worth its weight in salt is going to be indexed, as you know, by PubMed. So I would say go to PubMed. Don't go to, just Google or something like that. You want to be more scientific. Go to PubMed and put in the word polysaccharide, maybe polysaccharide aloe vera, polysaccharide rice bran, polysaccharide mushroom, depending on which plant you're interested in. But to me, polysaccharide research is pretty widely distributed now and across PubMed. even for non-scientists, I mean, if you can just try to read, maybe the abstract of an article, that would give you at least a little bit of a starting point. I agree with you. It's definitely a complex body of information. So you have to do your best. I mean, maybe lean on, your physician or a family member or somebody who has more of a scientific bent or direction or purpose in life. But to me, these polysaccharides are just so important that for anybody, I would say, don't be so blinded that you can't appreciate the benefits of what aloe vera and rice bran can do for you. That's not going to at all detract from your overall dietary habit. I mean, if you think about the amount of material, we're only talking a few hundred milligrams per day to maybe a gram or two per day, depending on, what your health status, your age, something particular you're dealing with. Out of, I don't know what the average American eats today, 2,000, 2,500, 3,000 calories, whatever that is. So you're talking about so little macronutrient volume or mass in relationship to your entire diet. So to me, I would just, like any other thing that you're thinking of, getting into on some either purchasing level or some level of where you're, trying to make a decision about whether or not you should incorporate this into your life, do your best research. Like obviously consumer purchases, a very good resource is Consumer Reports. Same thing on the science side. Go to PubMed. I mean, that truly is the gold standard for scientific information. And I mean, you can even just put in my name, Lewis, John E., and you will find all of our articles that are published on PubMed. For anybody who does have an understanding of reading scientific literature, I would think and hope that you would be impressed with the volume of information that just our little group from the University of Miami has put out, let alone, all this other just incredible research from scientists around the world.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lewis. It's been an interesting conversation and discussion on polysaccharides, and especially from rice bran and aloe vera and how they can impact the body and the brain and just overall human health. I personally look forward to looking into these polysaccharides a little bit more deeply and better understanding how to utilize them properly to get those benefits as I work with clients or family members and people who I know can benefit from that based on the topic and the discussion that we've had today. So thanks for taking time and being on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure, and I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. So it's been my honor.
Thank you for sharing your time with us today. I hope you've gained insights to elevate your health and life. For more transformative evidence-based wisdom, I invite you to explore my 20-plus books at authorscott.com/shop. Don't miss out on the chance to supercharge your health and guide others to a better life. Like, share, and subscribe to join the movement transforming lives. Here's to your journey toward boundless health and happiness.